In 1700, the largest city on Earth was not London. It was not Paris. It was not Rome. It was Tokyo. Except it wasn't called Tokyo yet. It was called Edo, and it had 1 million people at a time when most European capitals had fewer than 300,000. Nobody in the West knew it existed. Nobody in Edo particularly cared. This is the story of the city that became the template for modern urban luxury, and the extraordinary people who built it from nothing in less than a century.
Hi, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. If this video caught your interest, subscribe to the channel. The real lives of the wealthy in the past were far stranger, more scandalous, and more fascinating than any TV series. If you agree, hit subscribe. If you think I'm exaggerating, drop a comment. The next story will shatter yet another myth about the glamorous life of the elite.
Edo was not supposed to exist. In 1590, when the warlord Tokugawa Ieyasu was given the region as his territory, it was a swamp, a fishing village on a muddy bay with no strategic value, no natural resources, and no reason for anyone to build anything significant there. Tokugawa built a castle anyway, and then he built a city around it. And then in 1603, he became the most powerful man in Japan and made that city the center of everything. Within 50 years, Edo had one of the most sophisticated urban infrastructures in the world, a water system that delivered clean water to every neighborhood, fire brigades because the city burned constantly and rebuilt constantly and got better every time, markets for everything, entertainment districts, a postal system, a financial system, restaurants. Japan invented the restaurant as a concept, and Edo had thousands of them. The city worked because it had to. 1 million people in one place is not a romantic notion, it is an engineering problem, and Edo solved it. The elite of Edo lived at the center of all of this, the shogun in his castle, the daimyo lords in their massive walled compounds surrounding the castle, the samurai in their neighborhoods outside the compounds, and below all of them, officially below all of them, the merchants and craftsmen who actually made the city run. The hierarchy was simple on paper. The shogun ruled everything. The daimyo served the shogun, the samurai served the daimyo, the merchants served everyone. What the hierarchy did not account for was money. The samurai had status but were paid in rice, and rice prices fluctuated. The merchants had no status but accumulated cash, and cash, as it turned out, was more useful than rice in a city of 1 million people. By 1700, the wealthiest people in Edo were not the samurai. They were the merchants who lent money to the samurai. The official social order and the actual financial order had completely reversed, and everyone knew it, and nobody said anything because saying it out loud would have been deeply inconvenient for everyone involved.
The shogun of Edo did not live like a king. He lived like a prisoner in a palace. Edo Castle had over 1,000 rooms. The shogun used perhaps 20 of them. The rest were occupied by officials, guards, administrators, and the women of the Oku, the inner palace where the shogun's wives, concubines, and their attendants lived in a completely separate world that no man except the shogun was permitted to enter. The shogun's day began before sunrise, not because he chose to wake early, because the schedule said so. Every minute of every day was prescribed by protocol that had been established generations earlier and could not be changed without a formal deliberation that would take months. He woke. Attendants dressed him. This took approximately 45 minutes because each layer of clothing had to be put on in the correct order with the correct words spoken at the correct moment. He ate breakfast, 20 dishes minimum, prepared in separate kitchens by cooks who specialized in single categories of food. One kitchen made only soup, another made only rice, another made only fish. The food was tested for poison before it reached him. By the time it arrived at his table, it was frequently cold. This was considered acceptable. Warm food was less important than surviving breakfast. His meetings were conducted through intermediaries. The shogun rarely spoke directly to anyone outside his immediate circle. Requests came in writing. Decisions went out in writing. The most powerful man in Japan communicated largely through documents. He could not leave the castle without a formal procession that required weeks of preparation and shut down entire sections of the city. Most shoguns left perhaps a dozen times in their entire reign. The Oku, the women's palace, was in many ways more powerful than the shogun himself. 3,000 women lived there. They controlled access to the shogun. They managed the internal politics of the castle. They raised the heirs. Several of them effectively ran the government for years, while weak shoguns sat on the throne and signed documents they did not write. History recorded the shoguns. The women of the Oku ran the country.
Below the castle and below the samurai lived the people who actually made Edo work. The merchants, the craftsmen, the entertainers, the cooks, the builders. 1 million people who had no official status and ran everything. Edo had a word for this world: Shitamachi, the low city. It sat below the castle on flat land near the bay, and it was everything the castle was not: loud, crowded, creative, chaotic, and extraordinarily alive. The residents of Shitamachi did not have samurai status. They could not carry swords, they could not wear certain colors or certain fabrics. The sumptuary laws of the Edo period told commoners exactly what they were not allowed to own, wear, eat, or display. So they found ways around every single rule. The laws said commoners could not wear silk, so they wore cotton, but they lined the inside of their garments with the most expensive silk available. From the outside, a commoner looked appropriately humble. From the inside, they were wearing something that cost more than a samurai's monthly rice stipend. The laws said commoners could not display wealth openly, so they developed an entire aesthetic philosophy around hidden luxury, shibui, the beauty of things that do not announce themselves. A plain wooden box that opens to reveal lacquerwork worth a fortune. A simple robe that turns inside out to show hand-painted gold. Luxury that existed entirely for the person who owned it and nobody else. This was not poverty disguised as virtue. This was a sophisticated response to oppression. The people of Shitamachi created a culture of excellence that operated entirely below the official radar. The kabuki theater was theirs, the woodblock print was theirs, the haiku was theirs, the restaurant was theirs. Everything that defines Japanese aesthetic culture today came from the commoners of Edo, who were officially at the bottom of the social order and culturally at the top of everything. The samurai had status, the merchants had everything else, and by 1750, everybody knew which one mattered more.
Edo lasted 268 years. It ended on a single afternoon in 1853 when 4 American warships appeared in Edo Bay and refused to leave until Japan agreed to open its ports to foreign trade. The ships were commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry. He had cannons. The shogunate had swords. The negotiation was brief. For 268 years, Japan had been closed. Officially, completely, deliberately closed. No foreign ships except a small number of Dutch and Chinese traders at a single port in Nagasaki. No Japanese citizen was permitted to leave the country. Anyone who tried was executed. Anyone who returned from abroad was executed. The closure was total, and it was enforced with absolute consistency for over 2 centuries. Inside that closure, Edo had built something extraordinary. A city of 1 million people with sophisticated infrastructure, a thriving culture, a complex economy, and a social order that everyone participated in and everyone quietly subverted. It was not a perfect society. It was a functioning one, and in many ways a remarkably sophisticated one. Perry's arrival ended all of it. Not immediately. The formal collapse of the shogunate took another 15 years. But the moment the black ships appeared in the bay, every person in Edo understood that the world they had built was finished. The shogun who received Perry's demands could not refuse them. He could not fight. He could not negotiate as equals. He signed what was put in front of him and watched the American ships sail away, knowing that they would come back with more ships and more demands. Within 15 years, the shogunate was dissolved. The emperor, who had been a ceremonial figure in Kyoto for 2 centuries, was restored to power. The samurai class was abolished. The daimyo lost their domains. The entire structure that had organized Japanese society for 268 years was dismantled in less than a decade. Edo was renamed Tokyo. The emperor moved in, and the city that had been the largest in the world for over a century became the capital of a country that was desperately trying to become something else entirely. The merchants of Shitamachi survived. The culture they created survived. The hidden luxury, the kabuki, the woodblock print, the restaurant, all of it survived and eventually became what the world thinks of when it thinks of Japan. The shogun's castle became the imperial palace. It still stands in the center of Tokyo. You can see it from the street, but you cannot enter. Some things about Edo never changed.
That's what luxury actually looked like. Not what they put in the history books, what really happened behind closed doors. Drop a comment. Which civilization do you think lived the most extravagant life? I read every single one. Subscribe for the next story, and I'll see you there. Bye.